Hello, and welcome to Greet the Week. I am Mona Duncan, and today we're going to be talking about Dr. Martin Luther King and uh, and honoring him. So I'm going to bring up the PowerPoint, and we will look at that. Oh wait, I didn't share. I need to do that first. I forget that sometimes to share with you. And I really appreciate the fact that you're attending and watching live or coming back and seeing it at another time because I appreciate you very much. Okay, so we're going to share and go all the way up with it. Okay, honoring Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I like to look at the fact and ask myself, am I my brother's keeper? Which is an ancient saying of, yeah, I think we are more than we may want to embrace. And then also, not only how can I be my brother's keeper, those that are closer to me, but then how can I be an influencer for my neighbors and so forth. So, what I have here to start out with, I just wanted to share some of my favorite quotes from Dr. Martin Luther King. And so here is one. He says, science investigates, religion interprets. Science gives man knowledge, which is power. Religion gives man wisdom, which is control. Science deals mainly with facts. Religion deals mainly with values. The two are not rivals. And I absolutely love that science and knowledge and seeing what is, weighed and measured and is truth is not a rival of a belief that things can get better, that things can improve, and that religion gives man wisdom, which is control, and that control is self-control, not necessarily to be in control of others, but it's the self-control. And so then here's another quote from Dr. King, that darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. And how much better off we always are individually when we can realize what is possible and what is not possible. And to realize that. So here's another quote. As my sufferings mounted, okay, Dr. King was a Baptist minister and had some, matter of fact, there was a time in 1960s that he was accused of being an instigator of riots and violence and so forth. So the third quote that I have here from him is that he said, as my sufferings mounted, I soon realized that there were two ways in which I could respond to my situation, either to react with bitterness or seek to transform the suffering into a creative force. I decided to follow the latter course. So to see how we can be applicable with other people regardless. And then, so here's the next page of some quotes from Dr. King. He said, I have decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden to bear. And as we can really realize that in our own being and can actually feel it in our own being, how easier it is to acclimate. So this is three little paragraphs from a sermon entitled Loving Your Enemies. And so he said, love your enemies. It is this, that love has within it a redemptive power. And there is a power there that eventually transforms individuals. Just keep being friendly to that person. Just keep loving them. And they can't stand it too long. Oh, they react in many ways in the beginning. They react with guilt feelings, and sometimes they'll hate you a little more at that transitional period. But just keep loving them. And by the power of your love, they will break down under the load. That's love, you see. It is redemptive. And that is why Jesus says that, says love. There is something about love that builds up and is creative. There is something about hate that tears down and is destructive. So love your enemies. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you agree with them. It's just that each person, whether righteous or not, has infinite worth and value. And there's more value in the detractors sometimes than we want to give credit for. So here's just a few other quotes from Dr. King. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. So to be willing to speak up, not in, I mean, maybe in a protest, but not in violence, but to get your point across. Let no man pull you so low as to hate him. And that is something that is within our purview. That is something that is within our ability. Within our only, we have the ability to change the way we see things, the way we perceive them, the way we begin to think about. That point number 3 here is that forgiveness is not an occasional act. It's a permanent attitude. And then always, always, always realizing right here at the very bottom that you cannot know what you've never experienced. And so it's being open to that, well, I don't know, I may be passing a judgment here that I have no right to pass. So here is a cycle by which civilization and individuals rise and fall that was written by Alexander Tytler. And it's saying the same thing, but I want to go with another graphic that I gave that wants you to see this. So going back to the fact that you can't know what you've never experienced, and from Alexander Tytler's, that we start off with bondage, or whenever bondage comes, you just feel that you have no freedom. That is, we can mount up and begin to have some kind of, see some things that we can't see physically, that we begin to have this inward belief that the sun's going to rise tomorrow and I'm going to be ready for it. And so we begin to have that little faith. It may be very weak, it may be very nascent, but just to think that, to begin to believe that instead of being in this, something's got to give, that let's just give a little bit of air and a little bit of leeway to seeing things differently than the way we have seen them. And as we begin to have that faith, even though it may be a little weak, we begin to develop some courage. That, oh, okay, well, if I speak in a softer tone, maybe there's not so much pushback. And we begin to have the courage to speak up. And as we begin to have that courage to be who we are and to find out who we are liberated. And that liberation begins to lead us to being abundant in that we receive more information and we receive more insights, and we begin to see how life really is pretty good after all. And then what happens all too often is whenever we get down into that abundance where things are really beginning to go our way, that we kind of begin to become selfish and we don't want to share and we don't want to work hard because, I deserve this. And we become into a mode of complacency. Well, I'm okay now, so I'll just kind of rock along here. And in that complacency, often it leads to apathy. That, well, I am who I am, I've got what I've got. And then it leads to dependency in that I'm apathetic and here's where I am, but I just want to stay here and don't bother me and all that kind of stuff. And we become dependent upon something outside of ourselves to give us a little spur in the morning, whether that be all kinds of addictions and all kinds of things that can get in there to kind of help pep us up and so forth. We become dependent upon stuff instead of going back to that spiritual faith and that courage and that liberty. And that leads us into bondage again. And so what happens is all too often as we begin in that upward climb, and it is a climb, but it takes us back into bondage, that we often feel our feelings before we can relate with the situation or with the emotions of others, that we're so busy being myopic that we're not really looking at what we're doing even to ourselves. And so, therefore, our racing mind begins to skim the surface and forms conclusions, but those conclusions that we form are often a myth. And so, this busy mind has a difficult time understanding how silence and stillness can help us see both the confusion and the empathy, both the solution as well as the destruction. So there is a mysterious something beyond our calculating and our dualistic mind. So here's just a few thoughts. Van Allen, this was in this, there's a big article on the front page of today's Waco Tribune Herald. And Van Allen, 96 years old, was present for Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. And he stayed for several months and lived in that area for quite a while and began to work with the movement of Dr. King. And he talked in this article again and again and again about how hardship is often the source of blessings. And as we can begin to see that, even though it's difficult, that doesn't mean that it's not effective. And I think about not only the racial issues that's still going on worldwide, but look back at the Native Americans and how badly they were treated. We, as sane, sensible human beings, that they're not so sane, sensible, and human. And here's a couple of books that I've recently read that it just is so empowering as to what could have been as opposed to what was. And then looking at the worldwide immigrants forever, and I'm thinking back on my own personhood, and have counted back that there's 5 generations back in my personal family lineage that were not immigrants, that were born here in the U.S. of A. And sometimes we forget that all of us are products of immigrants, unless we were part of those Native Americans or those that were here from the beginning. And then looking at the varying degrees of ability, again, that's in our world. And on the Sunday morning program, there was a segment there on this school, and it was a young man. He was, I think, in the 3rd grade, and their school had wonderful playground equipment, and the kids could get out there and they could play and have kinds of fun and climb and swing and do all kinds of things and all the wonderful playground equipment. But this young 3rd grader began to see others that were in wheelchairs or that had disabilities, and they weren't able to get out there and play like the rest of the students. And he talked to his teacher about it. And his teacher was, isn't there something that we can do to have some equipment that the students that have physical handicaps can still participate? And anyway, the teachers began to look at some things and said, well, it'd take $300,000. Well, this young man spurred his fellow classmates to begin to raise money and to begin to ask people to help to donate so that they could have some playground equipment for those that were not physically able to do so on their own. Anyway, to make a long story short, their goal became, not only did they reach the 300,000, and not only was their school able to have a playground where all abilities and disabilities could participate, but they wanted to go even further than that. This young man, 3rd grader, wanted to spur and get enough money and enough equipment in and donated so that the other schools in the community or in the state could have that equipment also. And they dubbed it To the Ceiling and Beyond. And then I think also in unity and in really appreciating everyone, going back to the 2002 Saturn commercial, where they had people riding in a car, but all it was like the seats and the people that were there, and children in the back seat and in life jackets and so forth. And their commercial was, when we design cars, we don't see sheet metal. We see the people who may one day drive them. And it was looking at seeing humanity and seeing who we as individuals really are and appreciating one another. So, in looking at love, and love requires much of us. And I do not know who wrote this. It is quoted. It's something that I came across years ago that I pick up ever so often, and I'll read it because it's so powerful. And love requires much of us. It requires growing less selfish. I matter, but I'm not the only one that matters. It requires seeing a wide scope outside of one's private preserve. It means celebrating a life other than your own. It means welcoming diversity. It requires being open to change. And so maybe love is too heavy a word. So let's just think at least about civility. Being civil requires much of us. It requires growing less selfish. It's okay, go ahead. I'll let you go first. I will yield to you. It requires seeing a wide scope outside one's private preserve. It means celebrating a life other than your own. But don't forget to celebrate your own because you matter. It means welcoming diversity. And the Glasser Institute for Choice Theory has a wonderful program that comes on Saturdays, and it's Conversations in Diversity. And I would encourage you to go to the Glasser Institute for Choice Theory and look up the code to get in and either be there live and join in the conversation or to watch some of the previous programs. It's available at no charge. Civility requires being open to change. So, a life and death perspective. And this is concerning Damar Hamlin, the young man that had cardiac arrest on the football field. Reverend Bill Tinsley is a retired pastor here in the Waco area, and he writes a column every Saturday. And I wanted to share with you just a small part of what he wrote. And he's talking about, I'm sure you're aware of the young man that was on the football field, the NFL, and had cardiac arrest. Anyway, so Dr. Bill Tinsley says, why did this moment grip those who were there? Why has it gripped our nation? Perhaps it is because our deepest need is not competition, but compassion. The men on that field were trained to compete, to win at all costs. But at that moment, on January 2, compassion was far more important than competition. Damar Hamlin was a little known among the hundreds of NFL players before he collapsed. A week later, coaches and staff wore sweatshirts that proclaimed love for Damon number 3. And it goes on to talk about not only was it his coaches and trainers that was wearing there, but there was many others from the NFL that was wearing the t-shirt saying the same thing. So it is compassion. So I think of Mother Teresa, and I love her poem anyway. So to share it with you. People are unreasonable, illogical, and self-centered. Forgive them anyway. If you are kind, people will accuse you of having selfish motives. Be kind anyway. If you are successful, you will win some false friends and some true enemies. Succeed anyway. If you are honest and frank, people may cheat you. Be honest and frank anyway. What you spend years building, someone could destroy overnight. Build anyway. There is more. You see, in the final analysis, it is between you and God. It's between you and what you do. It never was between you and them anyway. So thank you for being here, and many blessings to all.